Today I will talk about one more game against Geert van der Stricht. In a funny incident, I actually played against the same opponent against whom I already played in the Dutch league, again in the Belgian league. This time I played for my Belgian club Eupen against his Belgian club Gent. I again had the white pieces, and since we last time played the Slav, this time I wanted to play something different. Just to deviate from what we had done before, and I saw that there is a tricky move order which I could use. So against the Slav, what I did this time was to delay the move d4 strategically. So I went for knight f3 and for the same line that we played before. And after these moves, I could still transpose to a similar line like the one we had in the previous game, but I chose, as I said, not to include d4, which has some merits. So I went for h3, and now basically black faces an option. So either black can take, and then after queen takes, go for something like e6 and transpose to the other main line of the Slav after d4, or black can go bishop h5 to try and transpose into the line which we played in our last game. But here white has a different option as well. So after g4, bishop g6, I don't have to go d4 and knight e5, but instead I actually can go for something which is, I think, quite a bit stronger, namely the move queen to b3. And I think objectively here, white is already better. So the disadvantage of bringing the bishop to g6 is that I now have a double attack against b7 and d5, which basically forces black to defend with queen b6. Of course, with the idea, if I take on d5, to always have an exchange on b3 before taking back on d5. For that reason, I decided to go g5 first. This was all my preparation. And he went for knight to e4, trying to release the pressure against d5 by exchanging on c3. Okay, c takes d, knight takes c3, and now black basically recaptures the pawn with this maneuver bishop to e4 and then takes on d5. Okay, takes, now bishop e4, and this is what I had prepared as well, bishop e2, and bishop takes d5. So my opponent played many years ago, and I think in the early 2000s, he played a game in this very same position against the Grandmaster Malachatko. And Malachatko now continued the game with c4. Eventually, he lost against my opponent in an interesting game. The computer in this position actually told me that white is quite substantially better if instead of c4, white goes for the move queen to c2. Well, what is the merit of queen c2? Actually, first of all, it kind of uses the bad position of black's queen on b6. You could later on, in many lines, get a tempo on the queen. But maybe more importantly, it actually puts some pressure on this bishop on d5 right now. So because white now wants to go e4, and then the bishop will not have as many nice squares. You don't really want to go back to e6 because you block the e7 pawn in this case. So, black has two logical options. One is what my opponent did in the game, playing the move c5, and the other one, which is slightly preferred by the computer, is to take on f3, and then to go for something like knight d7 and play calmly. But actually, I like this position quite a lot for white as well, because you have a very natural plan. You go rook b1, and maybe later on you do something like this, and it's even not so easy for black to finish the development of the f8 bishop. In any case, my opponent, after queen c2, he thought for some time, and then he went for the move c5. Now I can kick back the bishop with e4, bishop to c6, and now just d4, intending to go d5 next. My opponent basically has to stop this advance with e6, and now I think it's the first time to take an inventory. White is much better developed. The queen on b6 is misplaced, and the bishop on c6 is also slightly misplaced because it first of all blocks the knight, and secondly it in some cases runs into d5. So it's clear that white has a large advantage here. I guess the most accurate move here would have been castles, because it wouldn't allow my opponent to play what he did in the game, and to then just go for the same plan as in the game, to just go rook d1 and d5, and white has a large advantage here for sure. Instead, I went for bishop e3. I thought to first bring the bishop to e3 would not hurt me, but I think he played now a quite clever move order by just taking on d4 once, and now giving queen a5 check. So at least he gets rid of this quite bad position of the queen on b6, and he doesn't lose the tempo doing so because he now gives a check. Well, if I go bishop d2, he has bishop b4, and I don't really want to exchange more pieces here because I have the space advantage and development advantage. So I had the feeling I should punish him for this setup. So there are two logical moves to do so. One would be king f1, and the other one is the one I played in the game, which is knight to d2. Yeah, he continued his development with knight to d7, and now I castled, and he went for bishop e7. And here I realized that I should play quickly, because if I waste more time on defending this pawn on g5, for instance, he might castle, and despite the large space advantage, maybe he has some ways of equalizing, and I could even be a bit too extended in some cases with this pawn on g5. So for that reason, I thought I want to go for d5, and the way of achieving that would be to play the move knight to b3. Might seem a little bit more logical to go knight c4 at first glance, but there I had the feeling after queen c7, this c-file would not necessarily be to my advantage, but could also be to his advantage in the future. So for that reason, I went for knight b3, preventing queen c7 because of d5. And so basically the queen now has to go forward. He went for the move queen to a4, and as we will see in the game, this move has some disadvantage compared to the move queen to a3. So I will come back to that in a moment. But for the moment, note that this move would have been stronger because it would have also kept control over the d6 square. Instead, as I said, he went for queen to a4. And now I try to make use of his lack in development by just going for rook to fd1, intending d5 and then d6. And if I get d6 in and he has to go bishop d8 or something, the game is basically over with this very, very strong passed pawn. So for that reason, he played the most logical move, namely knight to b6, putting more control over d5. But still, I can now just go d5, and that's what I did in the game. And this leads to a very, very large advantage for white. After takes, I now just went for bishop takes b6, takes, and now I took on d5, attacking the bishop. So the bishop has to move. And now we will see the disadvantage of this queen on a4 compared to the queen on a3. So with the queen on a3, he would still have some control against d6. But here I actually go for for rook to d4, kicking the queen away, and only now he lands on a3 with the rook on d4 rather than on d1. And this now allows me to go for d6. Now the point is, if he takes now, then I can just double the rooks. With the rook on d1, I could not necessarily do that simply, but with the rook on d4, I can just double the rooks, and now I win one of the two bishops. So for that reason, he can't take on d6. And his king will remain in the center. So he basically is forced to take on g5. And now I started thinking for a bit longer, because I have so many options. It's clear that white is almost winning here, and I actually calculated 3 moves. One was rook e4, one was queen e4, and the move which I played, queen to c7, is the move which I calculated last. So according to the computer, rook e4 is actually the strongest move, but in the game I felt that this is maybe not so clear, so just king f8 and queen c7. But well, the computer says in such a position you can even just sacrifice the rook here and go for something like bishop g4, hitting the e6 pawn, and black is so badly coordinated that white is completely winning here. But this is obviously not so easy to judge in this position when you play rook e4 and then to see that you can sack an exchange like that. So I didn't really consider that at all. Instead, I thought maybe queen e4 could be an idea. When after either bishop e6 or king f8, let's say king f8, I thought after takes, he still at least has this queen a7. And he still defends d7, and while it's clear that white is clearly better here, I thought after queen c7 I had an even bigger advantage. So that's why I went for queen to c7. the threat of queen c7 is to go rook e4 check, or to just take a pawn. And actually here he took a very, very good practical decision, because I think in any case, even if he tries to defend, I could even still go rook e4 or even bishop g4, and white would be very close to winning anyhow. So instead he decided to give up this piece to try to get some counterplay. And I had seen this in advance, but I completely underestimated this possibility, because I thought, okay, after castles I can just take on d7, and I'm just almost a full piece up here against just one pawn, plus I have this d6 passer, and I thought I should just be completely winning here. It's actually also the case, but it's more tricky than I had expected. Yeah, so he went for bishop f6, eyeing both of my rooks, and now I have to give one rook back, and I decided to go for queen g4. Yeah, and this was my calculation, and now in my calculation when I went for this queen c7 line, I thought, okay, he would take. I will take back, and then I go for d7, and eventually I can consolidate this with bishop to b5 and rook to d1, and the game is completely over. But instead, my opponent played a little bit more tricky sequence here. So he went for rook fd8 first. And maybe you can try to pause the video at this point and try to see if you can find the winning combination for white. Well, in the game I actually missed it. So the winning move here is rook a to d1. It's the most logical move, I think. But in the game I started calculating this line, and I had a look at takes, queen takes a2 with a double attack, and now bishop c4. This was my calculation. And after b5, I calculated bishop to d5. He takes, I take on f7, takes, queen d6, and queen b3. And I realized that I'm not really better here. So the king gets sufficient shelter on g8, and afterwards the most I can hope for is a draw. So then I saw that in the position after b5, I might actually be able to take on f7. I was not perfectly sure about this in the game, but this is actually the winning move here. So take on f7, and now just queen d5 check. The point is, now you have to go back or outside, doesn't really matter, and now I just have rook d3 swinging the rook over, and there is no defense against this attack by white. I actually had even seen this line up to here, but I didn't play it, mainly because I then reconsidered, and I thought after rook fd8, if I go rook d1, what if he takes on a2 first? And I think for many reasons this doesn't work. For instance, white could maybe also go for something like rook to b4. But even the line which I had seen, I think doesn't work, because after takes b5, with the idea that now I can't really take on f7 in the other line, but I wouldn't be forced to go bishop d5 as I had thought, but I could also go for something like rook 4 to d2, and only then go bishop d5, and in this case white is probably winning. But it's not super straightforward to calculate that from the beginning. So let's say after this move, bishop d5, and now after something like rook d6, takes, the computer says rook takes f6 is winning, because now I have rook d7 next, and I have a mating attack. But again, this line is also not super straightforward to see if you start calculating rook a1 here. In any case, I should have gone for rook a1, and I also had the feeling that this was the best move. But I kind of panicked because I was running low on time, and I went for d7. And the point of why d7 is bad is actually very concrete. In the other lines before, I thought, okay, I will go for d7 at some point and then manifest this pawn with bishop to b5 or rook to d1. And it turns out that in this position, I don't have the time to do that. So he took on d4. And if I take back with the queen, Now he has a very strong move, queen to e7, attacking the e2 bishop and the d7 pawn. And no matter what I do, I will lose the d7 pawn. So if I go for bishop b5, he will go for queen g5 and capture the bishop. So that's not possible. And if I go to g4, he can just deflect my bishop and then take d7 on the next move with a position that is roughly equal as in the game. So for that reason, after bishop takes d4, my advantage has kind of evaporated within one move. And I decided to go for knight takes d4 instead of queen d4. But yeah, similarly as in the other line, he has this quite strong move, h5, in this case deflecting my queen and making sure that he can take on d7. There is not really a point of trying to defend here anyway, because if I go for queen f5, for instance, he can kick me one more time with g6. So I just took on h5. Now queen c3, another quite strong intermediate move, forcing my knight back to b3. He just took on d7. Yeah, and now it's pretty obvious that most of my advantage has gone. I think if I still had this pawn on g2 rather than on h3, I would feel that I can push for a win, but here I was already slightly afraid that I might also quite easily be worse here. So I first wanted to consolidate. I brought my rook to a better square, rook c1, rook c2, to get some stability, because the main thing that white is lacking here is coordination and stability between the pieces. So black's pieces are all quite harmonious, especially after what he does now, and white's pieces, they are a little bit discoordinated. So despite my material advantage, I didn't feel that I'm better here at all. And the computer gives a very small advantage for white, but I think it's already easier to play this for black. Okay, he went for rook e7, aiming to double on the e-file, and that's also what he did. Yeah, and here now the tricks already start. So in time trouble, it's quite unpleasant to face this position with white. For instance, one trick that you might fall into is queen to f3. Maybe you can now look for yourself how black would deal with that. Well, maybe you found it. It's just rook takes e2. And the point is after queen f6, rook e1 is an intermediate check. And now black is just winning. So for that reason, queen f3 doesn't work. But instead, yeah, I tried to at least connect my pieces again with the move knight to c1. And now at least all of these pieces protect each other. It's not a very active plan, so to speak, but at least I managed to get some connection. And now my opponent played really quite well. So he first of all went with the logical rook e5. And after queen g4, I had expected the move rook to g5. Which looks a little bit scary, because if I make a bad move now, he has queen g6 with this double threat. But this move is actually not as strong, because I have queen to d7. And now I'm just in time to go for rook c8, and we will get a position which is similar as the position in the game, but where black's pawn structure is much worse than what he got in the game. Yeah, so in the game, instead of going for this rook to g5, he went for rook to c5, exchanging one pair of rooks. And yeah, I have to take. And now the point is that he has a much better pawn structure. So I was still in time trouble. And for that reason, I went for the move queen to c4, which is definitely another mistake from me. I should go for something else. Maybe a move like bishop b5 is what the computer gives. But this feels like, you know, losing coordination of the pieces even more. So I was really not willing to go for that move. But yeah, it turns out after rook d8, king g2, white is doing fine. So I think it's probably around equal here. Instead, after the mistake queen to c4, now he found another very, very strong move in time trouble, namely the move queen to c6. With a very, very nice double threat. So first of all, of course, I should not blunder this mate. And secondly, if I go for king g1, he has a very strong move, namely the move b7 to b5. Yeah, so what's the point? If I take, he can just take back, and now go for this double attack, and I lose a piece and I lose the game. So after queen c6, in my last move before the time control, I actually saw that idea of b5 after king g1, and I went for the ugly looking f3. It's a move that you really don't want to make, but I think I have to make it here. So and after f3 he went for queen to h6, attacking this pawn on h3. And now I had a look at the other games, and the team was already winning by 2 points. And it was clear that if I make a draw, the team victory is sealed. But even otherwise, it looked as though the team would win in any case. So I went for the move h4, and now here I offered a draw, which after some deliberation, my opponent accepted. So what is the objective evaluation of the position? I guess black is still substantially better here because of this compromised pawn structure. But you might even imagine a scenario in which black might also go astray and lose. So I think it was the right moment to offer a draw, because it's not as straightforward how much better black is here. So how could the game continue? Well, he could have gone for something like queen to e3. This was what I was most afraid of. And now after a logical move like knight to b3, he could go for b6. And now the main problem is that this knight is a really, really stupid piece. So if I had this knight on an active square like, let's say, e4, it would be a completely different story, and I think white would be perfectly fine. But I have the knight on b3, and it's not so clear how I really want to release the tension that is put on me here. So I think that maybe objectively it's still within the drawing margin, but I would have suffered a little bit, I guess, here. So in that sense, I was happy that after the move h4, my opponent accepted the draw. So despite pressing for most of the game, and actually the fact that I should have finished the game earlier, I can somewhat live with the draw, because like the last game, which you also saw on the channel against Van der Stricht, I was lucky to escape and win. So I feel like if I had beaten him once more in a similar way, that would not really have been the fair outcome of the 2 games. So in that sense, I think it's all okay. As I said, the team won with a score of 5-3 in the end, and we are still competing for the 3rd place in the Belgian league. Well, that's it from my side today. I hope you enjoyed the game, and see you next time.
When you have stress, play chess. When you fall on your ass, play chess for a real deal, for Christian Seel.